At 3 a.m., my mother called me whispering, "Help me," then the line died. I found her abandoned outside a hospital in a blizzard, bruised and barefoot. They thought I was a paralegal. I was the managing partner of a forensic fraud firm. My mother's voice came through the phone like something pulled up from the bottom of a very deep place. Help me, then silence. Not the silence of a dropped call. The silence of a line still open, still connected, with nothing coming through it, which is a different and worse kind of silence because it means whatever happened with the phone still in her hand. I called back. Voicemail, again, again. 4 calls in 90 seconds. Standing in my kitchen in Chicago at 3:02 in the morning in the dark, watching my phone screen between attempts with the particular focused calm of someone whose body has already made a decision and is waiting for her brain to catch up. My coat was on the hook by the door. My car was in the garage 2 floors down. Outside the window, snow was coming sideways off Lake Michigan with the serious, committed intensity of a storm that has not decided to stop. I was behind the wheel by 3:07. I want to tell you that I had a plan. I want to tell you that I was calm, that I assessed the situation logically, that I drove 300 miles through a blizzard with the composed efficiency of a professional who handles crises for a living. Part of that is true. The professional machinery in me was running, noting details, storing information, categorizing what I knew and what I needed to find out. But my hands were white on the steering wheel for the first hour. And somewhere around mile 80, when a jackknifed semi materialized out of the whiteout conditions with about 3 seconds of warning and I steered around it on pure reflex, I noticed that I was shaking. Not from the near miss, from the voice on the phone. Help me. 2 words. My mother's voice stripped down to its essential frequency. Everything social and performed and carefully managed gone. Just the real signal underneath. I had been waiting 10 years for her to say those words. I had been building toward being able to answer them for almost as long. Warren Gould had no idea what kind of daughter was coming home. My name is Mara Calloway. I am 32 years old. I am the managing partner of Calloway Forensic Litigation, a firm I founded 4 years ago in Chicago, specializing in elder financial abuse, coerced estate transfers, probate fraud, and the specific category of cruelty that occurs when people treat the elderly like assets to be liquidated rather than human beings with rights and history and the hard-won ownership of their own lives. I did not start my career planning to do this work. I started my career as a paralegal at a mid-sized civil firm in Chicago because it was the job available when I graduated with my paralegal certificate at 21, and I was good at it, and I kept going. I passed the bar at 25. I spent 3 years at Hendricks & Moore learning elder law and estate litigation from a senior partner named Dorothy Chen. 40 years of practice, the most methodical mind I have ever encountered in a professional context. And then I left to build something of my own. I am good at this work for the specific reason that I have always known, from the inside, exactly what it looks like when someone uses a person's vulnerability against them. I grew up watching it happen in my mother's house, across a dinner table, in the particular silences that followed certain exchanges between my mother and the man she married when I was 11 years old. Warren Gould was 58 when he married Evelyn Calloway. He was a contractor, residential and commercial, moderately successful, the kind of success built on local connections and a social ease that made people trust him before they had evidence to. He had a son from a previous marriage, Caleb, 13 at the time, who had inherited his father's ease and applied it to the specific project of making my life small. I was not good at small. This caused problems. Warren had a way of framing everything I did, every achievement, every ambition, every attempt to exist as a full person in my own right, as a kind of aggression against the household. My scholarship to Northwestern, which I earned on academic merit after 4 years of working harder than anyone else in my class, was Mara showing off again. My plans for law school were delusions of grandeur. My friendship with a professor who had mentored me was Mara trying to escape her own family. My mother covered a bruise on her cheekbone with concealer in the bathroom mirror and told me it was from a cabinet door and looked at me in a way that meant don't. I left at 19 with 1 suitcase and a full scholarship, and Warren's voice following me down the driveway. Girls like you don't survive the real world. Caleb laughed beside him. My mother stood at the door with her arms crossed over her chest and didn't say anything, which was its own kind of answer, and which I spent the next 10 years trying to forgive, in the way that you try to forgive something you understand but cannot entirely accept. I called her every Sunday. She answered when she could. Our conversations had the quality of transmissions from a difficult distance, clear in patches, lost in static, never quite complete. 3 months before the 3 a.m. call, she mailed me an envelope, no note, just bank statements, 12 months of them, with certain entries circled in red pen, transfers out, amounts that escalated over time, routing numbers that traced to accounts I did not recognize. I looked at them for a long time. Then I opened a client file and started building a case. I had most of it done before the phone rang. I pulled up to St. Agnes Regional Hospital at 8:46 a.m. The storm had settled into a steady, serious snow, not the whiteout of the night hours, but the committed gray morning snowfall of a blizzard that has decided to stay. The hospital's main entrance was ahead of me, the parking lot half-loud, the sidewalk salted in uneven patches. I saw her before I had fully stopped the car. She was standing outside the hospital entrance, not sitting on a bench, not waiting under the awning, standing in the open, in the snow, in a hospital gown and bare feet. Her gray hair was frozen against her cheeks. Her lips were the specific blue of someone who has been cold for too long. Her arms were crossed over her chest, not for warmth, but but in the reflexive, self-protective posture of someone who has been hit and is still bracing. The bruises were visible from 30 feet away. I was out of the car before it fully stopped. I had to go back and put it in park, a detail I remember with the odd precision of extreme moments. And I ran across the parking lot, and she heard my boots on the pavement and turned. "Mara!" I wrapped both arms around her and my coat around both of us, and I held on. She was shaking so hard I could feel it in my own ribcage. Her feet were wet and red from the cold. Against my sleeve, I could feel the heat of something that was not body warmth. Later, I would learn it was a wound on her forearm that had not been properly dressed. "Who did this?" I said. Not a question. Her lips shook. "Warren said I was wasting money on the hospital." She swallowed, a small, effortful movement. "Caleb said the house wasn't mine anymore." She looked up at me with the eyes of a woman who has been told something so many times she has started to believe it and is not entirely sure anymore what is real. "They made me sign papers," she said. I held her tighter. Above us, the red light of the hospital's exterior security camera blinked steadily. Good, I thought. I needed that. I got her inside. Nurse at the front desk, a woman named Sandra who had 17 years in emergency reception, and the specific, unruffleable efficiency of someone who has seen every version of this situation, took one look at my mother and called for a room immediately. No waiting, no forms first, no insurance questions before the room. Just come with me. Patricia Osei, attending physician, 14 years of practice with a specialty in geriatric emergency medicine, examined my mother with a thoroughness and gentleness that I noted and have thought about since as the specific form of professionalism that is indistinguishable from care. She documented everything. Bruising on the throat consistent with pressure from hands. Bruising on both forearms consistent with gripping. A laceration on the left arm, approximately 4 centimeters, inadequately closed. Hypothermia, mild to moderate. A healing contusion on the left temple, approximately 2 weeks old, consistent with blunt impact. "Has anyone examined her in the last 2 weeks?" I asked. Dr. Osei looked at the chart. "There's no record of a prior visit." I looked at my mother. "The cabinet door," she said quietly. And then after a moment, "I know." I put my hand over hers. "I know you know," I said. "We're going to handle it." Warren called at 10:12 a.m. I was standing in the corridor outside my mother's room, my coat still on, a hospital coffee going cold in my left hand, my phone recording in my right. I had turned on the recorder before I answered. I have recorded every call of potential evidentiary value for 4 years. It is a habit so automatic it requires no thought. "Well?" Warren said. His voice was the voice I had heard in my head for 10 years. Smooth, satisfied, the voice of a man who has never been held accountable for anything and has arrived at the comfortable certainty that he never will be. The runaway daughter finally remembered her mother exists. "You left her outside a hospital in a blizzard," I said. "She discharged herself," he said. "We can't control Evelyn when she gets like this. In a hospital gown, with no shoes, in the snow." Caleb's voice, somewhere behind him, "Tell her mom's being dramatic. She does this." I was looking at the dried blood on my sleeve from where my mother's arm wound had pressed against me when I held her in the parking lot. I noted this detail. I noted the specific quality of Warren's voice. Unhurried, faintly amused, the voice of a man who believes the power differential is so absolute that the conversation itself is entertainment. "Careful, Mara," Warren said. "You're not in Chicago now. People know me here. The police chief has been to my house for dinner. Half the hospital board owes me favors. The mayor plays golf with me every other Thursday." A pause. "You're a glorified office girl with a paralegal certificate and a grudge." I let him finish. There is a particular skill in letting someone finish, in giving them the full extent of the rope, and it is one I have spent years developing. "Paralegal, actually," I said. He hung up laughing. I stood in the hospital corridor with the recording saved and the coffee still cold and something settling in my chest that was not anger. Anger is loud and wasteful. What I felt was quieter and more precise. The specific readiness of a person who has been preparing for something for a long time and has just received the signal that it has begun. What Warren Gould did not know, as he hung up laughing, he did not know that I had not been a paralegal in 4 years. I had been the managing partner of a forensic litigation firm that had, in its 4 years of operation, recovered $14.7 million in fraudulently transferred assets for elderly clients in 6 states, contributed to the criminal prosecution of 9 individuals for elder financial abuse, and been cited by the Illinois Attorney General's office as a resource partner in 2 ongoing fraud investigations. He did not know that 3 months earlier, when those bank statements arrived in a plain envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front, I had opened a preliminary case file, assigned 2 of my best investigators, and spent the subsequent 12 weeks building a documentary record of every financial transaction involving my mother's accounts for the preceding 3 years. He did not know that my car's dash cam, a Garmin dash cam 67W front and rear 1440p resolution with GPS logging, had recorded my arrival at the hospital with time, date, location, and the full visual of my mother standing barefoot in the snow. He did not know that I had been told, by Dr. Osei's documentation, that the camera above the hospital entrance had captured a vehicle matching Warren's registered 2021 GMC Yukon pulling away from the curb at 7:23 a.m., and that in the footage, a figure in a hospital gown was visible being left at the curb as the vehicle departed. He did not know that his phone call to me had been recorded in its entirety, and that the recording was already uploaded to my firm's secure cloud server, backed up up in 2 locations and sent in compressed format to my associate Danielle Park with instructions to log it as Exhibit C in the developing case file. He did not know any of this. He thought he was dealing with a runaway daughter with a grudge and a paralegal certificate. That evening, I sat beside my mother's hospital bed while she slept with her arm properly cleaned and dressed and her temperature normalized, and the particular deep, exhausted sleep of someone whose body has been in sustained distress and has finally been given permission to rest. I sat there and worked on my laptop and did not feel anything that interfered with the work, which is the specific discipline that this profession requires, and which I am, by now, very good at. I drove to the county clerk's office at 8 wire the next morning, which is when they open. The property transfer was filed 6 weeks prior. My mother's house, the house she had owned outright since my biological father's life insurance paid out in 2009, the house that was in her name alone and had remained in her name throughout her marriage to Warren because even in the worst years she had held that one thing, had been transferred to a holding LLC registered to Caleb Gould. The notary on the document was a woman named Pamela Reese. I looked up Pamela Reese. She was Warren's receptionist at his contracting business, had been for 6 years. The witness on the document was a man named Derek Forsyth. I looked up Derek Forsyth, Caleb's girlfriend's brother. In my line of work, we call this a captive execution, a legal document signed under circumstances specifically engineered to prevent independent review, witnessed and notarized by parties whose interests align with the beneficiary rather than the grantor. It is not subtle. Arrogant men operating in small towns with friendly judges and golf buddy law enforcement rarely need to be subtle. I photographed every page of the filing. I called my associate James Whitfield, 26 years in forensic document examination, formerly with the FBI's Question Documents Unit, and emailed him the photographs before I reached my car. "How fast can you turn this?" I asked. "If it's what it sounds like," he said. 48 hours. It's exactly what it sounds like. That afternoon, Caleb posted on Instagram a photograph of himself standing in front of my mother's house, her house, the house where I had grown up, the house with the blue shutters my mother had painted herself one summer weekend, when Warren was out of town and she had moved through the yard with a brush and a specific freedom in her body that I had filed away carefully at age 12 because I understood, even then, that it was rare and needed to be remembered. Caleb stood in front of it with his arms spread and his face arranged in the expression of a man taking credit for something. The caption read, "New beginnings. Some people just don't deserve what they have." I screenshotted it, time-stamped, added to the file as Exhibit F. Warren texted me that evening, "You should leave before you embarrass yourself. Evelyn's fine. She's dramatic. Always has been. Nothing here concerns you." I typed back one sentence. "You targeted the wrong daughter." He replied with a laughing emoji. I went back to work. The bank records took 48 hours to fully trace because the transfers had been routed through 3 accounts in a structure that was clearly designed to create distance between origin and destination. It is the kind of structure that looks sophisticated until a forensic accountant looks at it, at which point it looks like what it is: a trail left by someone who understood that direct transfers were traceable and assumed that 2 intermediary accounts were sufficient obfuscation. They were not sufficient. My forensic accountant, Dr. Reena Subramaniam, certified fraud examiner, formerly with the SEC's Enforcement Division, 17 years of financial reconstruction, had the complete transfer map completed by Thursday morning. 6 wire transfers totaling $78,400 from my mother's retirement account to Caleb's LLC, which had been incorporated 6 months prior and whose stated purpose was digital asset investment and consulting. The LLC's operating account had then made 3 transfers to a cryptocurrency exchange account registered in Caleb's name, which had subsequently lost approximately 60% of its value in a market correction that was, as these things generally are, entirely predictable. My mother's retirement savings had funded Caleb Gould's failed cryptocurrency investment while she stood barefoot in the snow outside a hospital. I did not feel what you might expect me to feel at this point in the process. What I felt was the specific cold focus of someone who has identified the complete shape of a thing and is preparing to present it. The feeling I had about what had been done to my mother lived underneath the work, underneath and constant, a low frequency that powered everything without interfering with the precision of it. Real rage does not scream, it builds the file. I filed for emergency guardianship in Harlan County District Court on Thursday afternoon. The filing was 340 pages. It included Dr. Osie's medical documentation with photographs, the dashcam footage of my arrival, and the exterior hospital footage of the abandonment, both authenticated by chain of custody affidavits. The full recording of Warren's phone call, with a transcript certified by a professional transcription service. James Whitfield's preliminary document examination report finding that the property transfer had been executed while my mother was medically documented as suffering a concussion. The hospital admission records from 3 days prior to the transfer, obtained through a medical records request, showed she had been treated for a head injury and noted as oriented X2, exhibiting confusion, which under state law voids a real property transfer as a matter of statutory incapacity. Dr. Subramaniam's financial reconstruction report, the county clerk's filing with its notary and witness conflicts documented, Caleb's Instagram post, time-stamped and authenticated, Warren's text message to me, with metadata preserved, and a sworn statement from my mother, taken in her hospital room on Wednesday morning with Dr. Osei present present as a witness, in which she described, in her own words, without prompting or leading, the events of the preceding 18 months. I had asked her if she was sure she wanted to give the statement. She looked at me with clear eyes, clearer than they had been when I arrived, clearer than I had seen them in several years of Sunday phone calls, and she said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask me the right questions." I asked her the right questions. The Honorable District Judge Sandra Beaumont had been on the Harlan County bench for 19 years. She had the reputation, according to the research my assistant had done at my request, of being thorough, impatient with procedural theater, and particularly attentive to elder matters. Her own mother had been the subject of a guardianship dispute a decade prior, which had informed her practice without compromising it. The hearing was Friday morning. Warren and Caleb arrived together, which I had expected. Warren wore a camel-colored wool overcoat and cufflinks, which I noted as the costume of a man who believes presentation is argument. Caleb wore designer sneakers and had the loose, unhurried posture of someone who has been told repeatedly that he is going to win and has started believing it. Warren's attorney was Douglas Penn, 51 years of practice in Harlan County, the kind of local attorney whose value is entirely relational. He knew the judges, he knew the clerks, he knew the procedural rhythms of a small county court, and he was very good at using all of that to make cases feel already decided before they were argued. He stood and said, "Your Honor, this is a family disagreement that has been characterized as a legal emergency by an estranged daughter with financial motivations and a chip on her shoulder." I connected my laptop to the courtroom's display system. I had done this approximately 60 times in 4 years. I do it the same way every time, methodically, without drama, in the order that builds the most complete picture. I do not perform, I do not editorialize. I present evidence and let it speak in its own register, which is always louder than anything I could say over it. First, the hospital security footage. My mother at the curb at 7:23 a.m., Warren's GMC Yukon pulling away, Caleb visible in the passenger window. The footage quality was sufficient to see my mother's bare feet on the salted sidewalk, to see the hospital gown, to see her bend down and pick up a plastic bag that had been thrown from the vehicle before it pulled away. A plastic bag that contained, as the hospital inventory had documented, her purse and her phone, both of which had been emptied of cash. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Beaumont's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. Second, Warren's recorded call. I played it from my phone through the courtroom speakers. The full recording, unedited. His voice filled the room. "The mayor plays golf with me. The police chief has been to my house for dinner. You're a glorified office girl." His laughter at the end. Douglas Penn shifted in his seat. Third, Dr. Subramaniam's financial reconstruction. The 6-wire transfers. The routing structure. The LLC. The cryptocurrency exchange. $78,400 of my mother's retirement savings traced from origin to destination in a document that was, as Dr. Subramaniam testified later, among the clearer fraudulent transfer structures she had seen in 17 years of reconstruction work. Caleb's smile was gone. Fourth, James Whitfield's document examination report. The property transfer voided on grounds of incapacity. My mother's hospital records from 3 days prior showing the documented confusion notation, the captive notary and witness, the structural evidence of a document engineered to avoid independent review. Fifth, and I want to be honest that I had not expected to have this one, that it arrived in my inbox at 11:47 the night before the hearing from an unknown sender who included only the file and a message that said, "I've been waiting for someone to care enough to look." Doorbell camera footage from the neighbor across the street, recorded 6 weeks ago, the evening before the property transfer was filed. Warren in the driveway of my mother's house, with his hand on her arm in the specific grip of someone who is not holding a person, but steering one. My mother pulling back, Caleb on the porch steps, leaning forward, his face in the particular configuration of someone who has decided that what he wants is more important than what someone else is able to give. His voice on the footage, the neighbor's camera had a surprisingly good microphone, as I have found is often the case with residential security systems, was clear. "Sign it or freeze in your own house, old woman." The courtroom went cold, not figuratively. The actual temperature of the room seemed to change, the way temperature changes when something enters a space that carries its own weather. Warren shot to his feet. "This is a private family matter being weaponized by—" "Sit down," Judge Beaumont said. She said it without raising her voice, which is the kind of authority that comes from decades in a room where you are the person who decides what happens. He sat down. Douglas Penn put his pen on the table and did not pick it up again. Before lunch, Judge Beaumont issued the following: emergency guardianship of Evelyn Calloway granted to Mara Calloway. All accounts and assets of Evelyn Calloway frozen pending full forensic review. Property transfer to Caleb Gould's LLC voided as a matter of statutory incapacity. Case materials referred in full to the Harlan County District Attorney for review of criminal charges including elder financial abuse, fraudulent conveyance, and criminal abandonment of a vulnerable adult. She also made a referral to the state bar regarding the notary, and a separate referral to the county clerk's office regarding the recording of a document whose procedural irregularities were, as she said, with a precision that I respected, apparent on the face of the filing to anyone paying attention. Douglas Penn gathered his papers with the careful movements of a man who has just experienced a significant professional recalibration. Warren stared at the bench with the expression of someone who has just discovered that the floor he built his certainty on was not the floor he thought it was. In the corridor outside, as the bailiff was escorting them out, Caleb turned on me. He lunged. Not seriously, not with real physical intent, but with the specific animal desperation of a person whose story has just collapsed entirely and is looking for somewhere to put it. The deputies were faster than he was. I stepped close enough that only he could hear me, with the deputies between us. "You ruined my life," he said. His voice was broken open in the way of someone who has never actually had to account for anything and is feeling the weight of accounting for the first time. "No," I said. "I documented it. You ruined it yourself." I stepped back. Warren was across the corridor, standing in his camel coat with his cufflinks and his golf contacts and his dinner parties and his absolute lifelong certainty that he was the kind of man the world protects. He was looking at me the way a person looks when they are running a very fast recalculation that is not producing acceptable results. He had told a 19-year-old girl with one suitcase and a scholarship that she wouldn't survive the real world. He had spent 13 years being right about most things and wrong about that one. He was finding out the difference now. I did not say anything to him. There was nothing he needed to hear from me. The evidence had already said it. 8 months later, my mother lives in Chicago now. The house, her house with the blue shutters, is being sold because she does not want to go back to it, and I think that is the correct decision. She has a 2-bedroom apartment 4 blocks from mine. She has a doctor she trusts and a neighbor she started having coffee with on Thursday mornings. She called me last week to tell me she had signed up for a pottery class, which she described with the specific, slightly embarrassed pleasure of someone doing something just for themselves for the first time in a long time. She is okay. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. Warren Gould was indicted by the Harlan County DA on 4 counts, including elder financial abuse, fraudulent conveyance, and criminal abandonment of a vulnerable adult. His trial is scheduled for spring. Douglas Penn has withdrawn from representation. The Gulf Buddy mayor issued a statement in October expressing concern about the allegations, which is the political equivalent of stepping away from a fire. Caleb pled to 2 counts of financial exploitation of an elderly person as part of a cooperation agreement and received 3 years probation, mandatory financial restitution, and a permanent bar from serving as a fiduciary. The LLC was dissolved. The cryptocurrency account, what remained of it, was seized. The neighbor across the street, a 67-year-old retired school teacher named Gloria Hartwell, called me after the hearing to make sure I had received the footage she'd sent. She said she had been watching things happen across that street for 2 years and had been afraid to say anything and wasn't afraid anymore. I told her what she'd sent had made the difference. She said, "I thought if someone came who was looking for it, I wanted them to find it." That is, in my experience, how these cases work. The evidence is usually there. The footage, the records, the documentation, the neighbor who saw things and kept them because they were waiting for someone to come and ask. The work is showing up and asking. I drive back to Harlan County twice a month for legal proceedings and to check on a few other cases that came to my firm's attention in the weeks after the hearing, because when a community watches one case get built correctly and brought to account, the people who have been waiting in silence begin to understand that the silence is optional. I have 3 new client files from Harlan County. The elder abuse case that was under everyone's nose for years, quietly suffocating under the weight of a small town's social architecture. Warren told me I was a glorified office girl. I don't spend much time on that sentence anymore. What I spend time on is the work, which is real, and the results, which are measurable. And my mother on Thursday mornings having coffee with her neighbor and reporting on the phone that the pottery class is harder than she expected and she isn't very good at it yet. Yet, that word. The man who told a 19-year-old she wouldn't survive the real world is now being processed by it. I did the processing. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you spend a decade learning to build the thing that was always going to bring him down, and you wait, and you stay ready. And when the phone rings at 3 a.m., you put on your coat and get in the car and drive toward whatever is waiting on the other side of 300 miles of blizzard. She said, "Help me." I came. The rest was just paperwork.